together, strengthen our quest for justice, bring us to unity and a common purpose. You have made us of one blood, make us also of one mind. Amen. Now, I'll just remind any members of the general public who should happen to be watching that the councillors all have their agendas and council papers on their iPads, what I'm going to call for now are any apologies or leave of absence. We have one pre-recorded from Councillor O'Keefe. Thank you.
Leave of absence, so we're still here, quarter to 3, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Could I have a mover and seconder? Thank you, Councillor Redstone. Thank you, Councillor Dixon. All those in favour, please say aye. Sorry, Councillor Sears.
Thank you, Chair. Leave of absence, please. February 22 from the 21st to the 25th to attend Director's Course.
Thank you.
And also leave of absence, please, on the 29th of October to 1st of November.
Thank you. And Councillor Lawson?
Thank you. I need to leave by 2:30.
Thank you.
I hope,
Well in advance.
Now, we did have a mover and seconder. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Now, we've had the minutes of the previous meeting previously circulated.
Sorry, Madam Chair, do we have conflicts of interest? Did you call for conflicts of interest?
Yes, yes.
Oh, sorry, I missed that.
Yes, no.
Item 9 and item 16.
Thank you.
Director Wainaka.
Thank you. And also,
Item 7, Chair.
Councillor Corbyn had already mentioned to me a conflict that he has, and Councillor Dixon?
Item 7, Tomato Peat Trust Board.
Thank you. Thank you. People will just respond to those accordingly, having pre-declared them. And now for confirmation of minutes. Could I have a mover and seconder? Thank you, Councillor Watkins, and thank you, Councillor Kerr. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? Carried. Thank you. Now, item 5, which is request received under the Local Government Official Information Act. We have a report from Louise Stetner, which is item 5. There is a recommendation to receive those. Could I have a mover and seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Redstone. Thank you, Councillor Watkins. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? Carried. Thank you. Now, moving on to item 6, which is actually the horse of the year, but we're a little bit ahead of ourselves. So we'll move on to the next item because we're going to have some people speaking to us about that report. So we will move on now to item 7, which is, sorry, Councillor Kerr.
I'm happy to move the report and the recommendations.
Thank you. And Councillor Barber?
I just said I'm a trustee on the Tomato Park Trust, so along with Councillor Dixon.
Right. So you're declaring a conflict. Thank you. So could I have someone who doesn't have a conflict? Thank you, Councillor Lawson. Okay. Is there any discussion or any question around that item? Well, I'll put those recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? Carried. Right, moving to item 8. Aaron, can I ask you to come and join us and talk to us about the draft financial end of year results? Thank you.
Thank you. This year has been quite a this year have been quite a challenging year in terms of the overall financials. There's been a lot obviously happening, and there's been a large capital spend. We've had money from governments, we've had COVID pressures, so it's certainly been challenging. The reason this is a draft is because currently the auditors are on site. They've been on site last week, they're on site this week, and they're on site next week. Once they've signed off, if they've got any potential misstatements or anything, they'll advise us of those, and that may then indicate a change in some of those financials. But we're not picking that that will be anything too major. Am I going? I see not. It doesn't seem to be moving that. Sorry, Krista. It doesn't seem to be moving that. Oh, thank you. Okay. Just a overview of the fact that we've got two accounting results showing here. So we've got the statutory reporting account result. That shows the annual plan only, doesn't include the carryforwards, doesn't include any additional budgets that we may have received or adjustments. Just repeating that because the dashboard shows the management reporting, which actually shows the revised budget against the actual. In terms of the rating result, it excludes any non-cash type transactions, any accounting transaction adjustments, but includes any cash type transactions there. So the actual draft accounting result itself showed that we had, before the adjustment for unrealised movement on swaps, $11.9 million favourable result, primarily driven, as you can see, by the operating revenue there of around $17 million favourable. That's driven primarily by the additional government funding that we received from Three Waters that was not budgeted for at the time because it came in after the budget. We had higher operating expenditure as well. Some of that was offset by the additional revenue. Some of that was offset by the contingencies that we released, approved contingencies that we released. The movement on swaps last year, that was a negative $13 million number. It's $8 million this year. Basically, it's an unrealised gain, which means we were never going to settle our position. It's just something we have to recognise from an accounting point of view. The revaluations had a significant uplift in movement of $101 million that you can see there. We had three revaluation asset classes this year. One was the land and buildings, which went up a significant amount of money, which is no surprise. We also had parks and roading. There was a couple of adjustments, technical adjustments to those revaluations as to the value of those ones. But overall, we had a movement of 101 million. So that at the end of the day gave us around a net surplus of 77 million once all those accounting adjustments have been taken account of. So in terms of the revenue, from a management point of view, we had an $11.9 million surplus before those other accounting adjustments were taken into account. It was largely, as I've mentioned before, driven by the increase in government funding that wasn't budgeted for, and also we had some increase in fees and charges through the landfill and also through the Splash Planet. The good year that Splash Planet had, which was really, really fortunate, and drove a lot of the rating surplus outcome. In terms of expenditure, there was $3.2 million above budget. Depreciation was a large factor in that, $2.5 million. That depreciation figure is being driven by the prior year's Three Waters revaluation number, which was significant. There's always a time lag as to when we've done the budgets, and then that number comes in through the revals. So as a result, it affects that following year. Finance costs were $1.5 million favourable. That was due to the fact that we actually didn't need the funding till right at the end because we'd received that government funding. It's also lower interest rate costs as we've managed our average cost of funds down. Contracted services and consultancy were higher. That was in part due to some of the large capital spends that we had, in addition to some of those one-off unbudgeted but approved areas like the Haratong House movement and the Warren Street movement. Some of those have been offset by the release of contingency. So those contingencies, there we had three of them. We had the general, we had the operational COVID contingency, and we also had the recovery contingency. They played quite an important part. They were made up of the landfill surplus from the prior year alongside the sale of the Orchard Road asset, and they were put into the contingency for the very purpose. And we used across quite a large range of projects that required that money and support. As you recall, we had the Haratong House, we had event support, we had and a number of those COVID areas that got impacted in their revenue were supported through contingency release. Whole of council capital spend, it was a massive $94.8 million. It was absolutely huge. It was the biggest capital spend in a financial year that we've ever had. The budget was a staggering $146 million, but that was partially made up of the fact that we had $30 million of carryforwards from the prior year. We also had a chunk of money given to us as COVID stimulus of 9.3. That was put into the budget, but actually what we would have done if we'd had time was adjust that budget back, but we had to go with what we got because that stimulus came in quite late. And so as a result, you have that effect that you've got there. In terms of how that actually split out, you can see most of the spend there was in that new works area of $53 million. We also had a fair chunk of the renewals done. Growth is always really difficult to budget because sometimes it looks like it's going ahead and then it can be stopped by factors outside of council's control. This is a graph that I thought would be interesting just to show of that spend increase from, the 16-17 year where we were at 55 million right through to the 94.8 million that we achieved last year. Now, if I went, I actually had a look at a couple of years before that and we were at the $38 to $40 million number. So it just really shows, even in the tight time that we've had and the resource constraints and the COVID issues that we've had logistically, that number is an absolutely huge outcome. In terms of external debt, of course, that has also gone up. However, some of that increase between the 2020 and 21 year is due to the fact that at the end of June, we borrowed $40 million. That was in expectation of the pre-funding of this new financial year's capital spend, as well as preparing for maturing debt that's rolling over in the May 22-23 year. And that's pretty much in line with what we would expect. It's in line with where the capital spend's been. And so, it just shows where that's gone, and it mirrors, in effect, the capital spend over those years as well. In terms of that by activity, this shows where all our money's going. It shows that it's 51% going into those three waters projects, which is not a surprise. You're talking about $102, $105 million of a $205 million number. And the rest is split out through those other areas, which was obviously the focus has been in that upgrade of those big assets.
Geraldine, in the future, it would be interesting to have the three waters split out into the three individual waters.
Not a problem.
if appropriate in the future,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah. We have that information, so it's not an issue, yeah. In terms of debt measures, these are measures, the limits are in our Treasury policy, and we're well under them in general. The one that's improved from last year is the liquidity ratio due to the fact that we borrowed actively for pre-funding in expectation. We've got $38 million. We have $38 million of cash in the bank, so that's a good position to be in. The June accounts payables were massive, absolutely massive. They were so big that when we actually asked for the refund for IRD, they came back to us and said, prove it. So I was more than happy to prove it. We sent the top 10 invoices and said, we've got hundreds of these, knock yourself out. They came back in about 2 weeks later and said, yeah, no, we agree.
So Aaron, just on the liquidity, we do operate within a range. So that liquidity ratio is a range that we operate to. So 110% is at the lower end. And we're always operating to have at least 110% of liquidity. So with that ratio, we aim to be above that minimum. I think the maximum is 175%.
Once again, just a suggestion, if we need to be below, can we put
Yes.
like the top one, maximum 150, and whereas the bottom one is minimum 110?
Yes, yeah, we'll do.
Thank you.
Yeah, I thought we looked at our debt to income ratio from 150.
We did from the 1st of July.
From 1st of July, so
Yes.
this is previous to that.
Yeah. In terms of the rating result, so 866K was the general rating result there, split between RA1 and RA2, 443,000 to RA1 and 422,000 for RA2. The recommendation there is around putting the bulk of that into the contingency reserve. Obviously, what's going on currently in the current country, there's a lot of uncertainty as to actually where we're really going. I'm not sure if anyone's got a plan or not, but there's a lot of uncertainty there. You know, you look at the numbers at 45 yesterday when we were at 8 the day before, and you go, okay, so where's the thing actually going? That's starting to obviously impact on community-facing type facilities that we have in terms of toy and so forth. Of course, that starts to restrict our revenue flows. It increases the risk. Do we go ahead with Splash Planet when we hire all these people? How does that all work if it goes wrong? So that's why contingency is strongly recommended for the surplus that we go for.
Just to reiterate that point from Mr. Wilson, so last year I think we were very grateful for the council's decision through the budgeting process to allocate proceeds from the sale of Orchard Road into contingency reserve, and that enabled council to make some decisions around how it responded from COVID lockdown 2020, and the allocation of the landfill surplus, rating area 1 share of the landfill surplus into the contingency last year certainly helped us as well to deal with unexpected costs, particularly to do with Hiratanga House, but also take advantage of opportunities as they arose, whether that be supporting other events and the like that we incurred, to help stimulate the economy as well. So for this year, the recommendation from officers really is around supporting that contingency reserve. As you see in the report, there is a little bit of funding still in there, but the year ahead of us is quite uncertain, even though we're a quarter into it. Looking at the balance of the year, it is still quite uncertain, and we all know that as an organisation we have a very big workload in front of us, and we may need to make some decisions around how we achieve that, and can that be achieved within current budgetary constraints.
And the RA2 flood reserve is also recommended to be topping that up. So in terms of the landfill surplus, it was $1.997 million this year. Last year we used it to repay the landfill gas debt, the general purpose reserve, which actually worked as the contingency for us, and the capital reserve got 125k topped up into there as well. This year, there's a couple of things. There's a star there for a reason. Bruce, Mr. Allen will probably talk about that a little bit further. But the initial recommendation is for that to go into the development reserve. As you'll have seen from the LTP over the next 10 years, there's significant spend in the development of the next valley. those spends are only going to increase over the next number of years. That will either incur debt, or while we've got the money, use that first and then incur debt second. So that's where the recommendation is. Bruce, would you just like to further with that?
That's right. So that, as Mr. Wilson alluded, the landfill development, the next valley is imminent as we work our way through the resource consent process. What we're just indicating there is that we do recommend that those funds be put into that reserve to offset future borrowing. However, as I alluded to on the previous slide, given the uncertainties that we've got this financial year, we're just sort of making that provision, you'll see it in the recommendations, that should council require it, that you can make a call to transfer some of that funding if the need arises or an opportunity arises throughout the balance of this financial year, to take advantage of that opportunity or meet those unexpected costs that we may incur.
Councillor Kerr.
I just wanted to speak about the rating surplus before we spoke about the landfill surplus.
Sure.
By my calculation, a rating surplus of 866,000 out of total revenue of 151 million is, I think I've been quoted before saying, like landing a huge jet on a postage stamp, because that's a 0.5% within our total budget. So I'd just like to compliment the team. I imagine there's been a lot of work to get to this point, so congratulations to you all, and please pass that back to your team. That's an outstanding result.
And when they were doing some of their most significant work, we were in the hardest stage of lockdown, so they were trying to do it from a variety of geographical positions. So it was quite an achievement.
So can I just respond,
Yeah, sure.
Madam Chair? I think it is actually a reflection of the whole organisation and all the budget managers that we have out there, and activity managers, because there's a very strong sense of responsibility that they have to ensure that they're operating within their budgets. So it's their work that actually drives and enables us to actually hit a rating result like that, as opposed to the finance team pull the information together, and there's a lot of manoeuvring that happens behind the scenes. But I think just that ethos of the organisation sort of contributes.
If I may add, it's also the responsibility not to just not go over the budget, but to spend the budget.
That's right.
So,
It's a fine line.
well done.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, the chair. I mean, I just add, like, the context last year was also, as you'll recall, rightly, for our community, you made a decision to soften the rates impact, which also, in addition to everything, meant we had to take out quite a lot of operating costs. And they're both challenges, but some positive things that have come out of that. So I just want to compliment the lead team and all the budget managers in the council, because I think there's been some positives that have come out of that, like paying attention to some things that perhaps we weren't previously. Disciplines like, actually, it's the leadership team meeting every week that looks at vacancies and approves them, and is it really needed? There's been some really good disciplines come out of the context of COVID. But on the flip side of that, just want to acknowledge also, and my thanks to the staff. Like, it has been a huge year, and shouldn't underestimate, nearly $100 million worth of capital delivery. Some very big projects, and so you also just always trying to balance the good disciplines, being fiscally responsible, with also some principles around a view on the long term and being sustainable. So we're trying to strike the right balance between continuing to do that, whilst we also recognise just the uncertainty for the organisation and the community that we serve. But it's been a big year, and my thanks to Bruce for delivering a surplus, and the role that all the budget managers in the organisation have played.
Thank you. Councillor Corbyn.
Thank you. Can we go back to the landfill surplus?
Yep, forward to that. Bear with me.
Yep.
The landfill surplus.
Do you want Sandra to go first?
No, it's all good. Yes, we'll go to you.
I'm just wondering whether putting that money into provision for more landfill, whether some of that could be directed towards greater recycling and waste minimisation initiatives, because it's quite a substantial amount of money, and we've identified that we want to reduce what's going to the landfill. So I don't know who to address that to, but I just want to put that out there.
I think it's an excellent challenge. I think at the moment the recommendation's saying, look, you should not use that surplus for any other reason than putting it to the landfill, giving yourself the provision whether it's contingent. But I think if the council was of a mind, you could take an action to say, look, we want staff to come back if there were things that we could invest in that reduced, which is consistent with our waste minimisation strategy, that is a choice that governors can make.
Thank you, Mayor Hazelhurst.
Thank you, through you, Chair. And can I also pass on my congratulations to an enormous delivery year, and also through some really big challenges of working through COVID and contractors, et cetera, But my question's around the surplus and just understanding, has any work been done, because it's not a great deal of money that we've got there to look at how we manage going forward. I just wonder if the price escalations of delivering our levels of service now, both in RA2 and RA1, are escalating and not taking into account even the new work that we've got on our books. So have we done any, and do we have any understanding? And just hearing the other day from a rural advisor telling us the price of Roundup has gone up nearly 4 times. So how have we done any work to understand what sort of levels of service we're going to continue to maintain and how we're going to manage? Because we look at that surplus there, and it's pretty small in terms of what we're dealing with post-COVID and the shortage of some of these materials that we require to do our day-to-day business.
Mr. Thu might want to comment some more, but there is a lot of work going on to try and understand the current. We're talking about, I think it's operational and capital, but if we're looking at it from a capital perspective and our capital spend, Craig's team been doing a lot of work understanding what's in front of them, what's deliverable this year, and where we have those constraints. And Mr. Thu probably talk to that a bit more. And we also have around the operational aspect, which this funding is probably more aligned to rather than the capital spend. And there is there's price escalations coming through on that, but a lot of that work's sort of contracted. And Craig?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think it's largely been covered. There's a lot of work going on right this moment in terms of looking at next year's annual plan and what likely cost escalations. But there are multiple pieces going on at the moment. So whilst costs are going up, we're also running into, as we've talked about, those potential risks of supply line and potential delays. So I think we've got to be careful that we just don't increase, that we're going to deliver 100 projects that are now going to cost 110%, because we might, with some of the resource delays or consenting delays, if we need to work through and get community buy-in, it might be that 90% at 110 means the money you've got's there. So we're doing a lot of work in the background just to make sure we've got enough to deliver on the level of service, but also be realistic around what we can achieve with some of the resource and supply line issues.
I'd like to just add, Madam Chair, and I think consistent with some conversations we've been involved in, Your Worship, also when you're looking at the capital work program from a price escalation, deliverability, market capacity, what we're facing is what everyone's facing. And I think one of the observations, and we need to come back before Christmas around what our whole work program looks like, is do we need to be doing everything we plan to do in a market that is red hot, that has got all of the supply chain and constraints? Are there some things that genuinely we could reprioritise and sequence? And that's some work that we've got underway that ultimately will be a conversation again for you as governors before the end of the year.
Thank you. Councillor Nixon.
Thanks, Chair. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to wait till the end or I could just ask on the way through. Several questions, they're not generally related. The generator, which we paid off 646,000, the loan, what was the book value left on that item?
There was an impairment that had been built up on that asset from memory due to the fact that early on, you probably may recall, there were issues with the amount of gas it could produce. And I think that I'm not going to quote a number because it was last year's number. So just I'm more than happy to come back and.
Yeah, just interested to see how close it did get. I was aware of the impairment. The second one is the interest rate swaps and borrowing, because I remember we made that decision in the light of an expectation of rising interest rates, which don't seem to have risen as much as we thought. How do we stand at the moment? Does that still look like have made the right decision with our forward borrowing and swap regime?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Our council's average cost of borrowing over the last few years has continued to decline. We're maintaining our swaps, fixed rates in line with the council's policy on fixed interest rates. So, and we're at the lower end, or sort of between the lower end and the midpoint of that range. So I think, council, we're managing that well. Our average cost of borrowing is still coming down as some of those older swaps mature. We do have forward starting swaps that have been sitting there for a while, and they will come in, but they're all at lower rates than what they're replacing. So I think generally it's working well.
There's just 2 points. One is just a comment, really. I think the Chief Executive and his team have done well meeting our rates reduction target, but it does show what can be achieved when you set a bit of a challenge out there. Just comment. The other one is just picking up on Sandra's point about inflation and so on. And I made the comment at Risk and Assurance recently that I could see because we've almost got a closed economy now. We're back to Muldoonism, aren't we? Hey, everything's shut down, you can't do anything. And do we sort of expect that there's going to be a shift, an increase in local manufacturing and local ability to supply, to get around the supply chain problems, particularly more than perhaps inflation?
I think your question is really beyond the scope of this committee and, calls for more sort of broad philosophical discussion.
I totally agree, but I couldn't resist the temptation.
I won't comment on, Muldoonism and all that, because it's not the brief of this committee, but the point is, this isn't unique to New Zealand. Whole supply chains have been disrupted globally, and most of the conversations we're having with industry leaders for all of the innovation that's going on, it's expected to be 12 to 24 months before we start to see, is what the industry leaders that operate in the space are expecting to see as the timeframes before there's any kind of return to something resembling what used to be normal. So it's going to be with us for a while, the challenges.
Thank you. Councillor Redstone.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to support Councillor Corbyn's idea as the Chair of Waste Futures and on Oamaranui Landfill. I think it's a good idea that we start to think a bit more laterally, and also just to pick up on Mayor Sandra's comment about I can't say it, that word, Roundup. I think we also need to be investigating better ways of ongoing weed control and treatment. So there's an opportunity here, I believe, to do some reviews on some of these products that we may or may not need. Roundup's actually going to be taken off the shelves anyway, so we need to be looking into that.
So maybe I could suggest again through you, Madam Chair, if Council is of a mind that we sort of include this in the top 10 that we're working on with the Regional Council that will come back, and how any investment decision around that might be, what that might look like for this council to make a decision on in due course.
Thank you. Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. Just a very simple question. We're receiving the draft report and allocating funds accordingly. Is there any expectation that through the audit process the funds will be the figures will be changed materially,
There is none.
and then will we just receive the formal signed off report at a subsequent council meeting it's the same as last time?
That's right. So the annual report, the formal annual report will be presented to you either on the 14th or the 28th of October. All going well with audit, who are currently on site. So, but we're not expecting there to be any changes to these numbers, not materially anyway.
If that is the case, then through you, Madam Chair, I'm more than happy to move the recommendations as written, acknowledging the flexibility that's been built in to the allocation to the landfill reserve. Expectation is it won't be needed, but understand it could be available.
We do have a suggested addition actually to D, which is talking about and waste minimisation opportunities. So if you're happy to
I'm not happy to change the recommendations. I think if we're going to create new spending, it should come through a formal process, annual plan, LTP type process.
Right.
I don't think it's a COVID response. That's my opinion.
Right. Are there other views? Okay, so we have a mover and a seconder for the recommendations, which are found on page 30.
Through you, Madam Chair.
Yep.
Just got my light on over here.
Yes, sorry.
I think this has been raised, and while it doesn't need to be a formal recommendation, I'd like an action taken that Eco Districts is able to look at this and do some work on it and see, and then bring a recommendation back through the right channels. But I think it's an important point. It's been raised, people agree, and we just need an action rather than change of recommendation.
Changing the recommendation.
Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, so I'll put the recommendations as written then. Oh,
Yeah, there's a couple more slides.
oh, sorry.
It's really important stuff.
Yes, yes. Carry on, Aaron.
Stuff insights there.
Oh, sorry, I won't take too much time. Just quickly, the RCB recommended on the 7th of September that the recommendations as have been tabled, and those were the 311 to the general, to be attributed, etc., etc. That's on that slide there. That's just what we've discussed in a total. That's a summary. Each of those numbers have already been tabled in earlier slides. Just one last thing is the carryforwards. So the carryforwards are around the $52 million that we're requesting or recommending that be carried into the 21-22 year. Carryforwards are a mechanism to transfer budget from one year to another. Otherwise, it becomes very, very difficult for officers to actually track the cost over the longer term of years if there's a multiple year project. Now, we're very aware that there's $127 million in the 21-22 budget already. Officers have already been looking actively at those projects that actually may not start in that year. We've got to remember that 2 to 3 to 4 years out in the LTP, actually the capital budget starts to drop back to around the $70-odd million mark from memory, which means that anything that we push, we carry it into that 21-22 year and then actively look at those ones that we actually want to rebudget into that following year. That means that eventually that will start to catch up as we follow the program.
I think just to follow on from that point, that the capital program last year, as you know, $94 million was delivered of capital works. Estimates for the current year that we're in is in the vicinity of 120 to 125 million. That's going to be, that's deliverable. Obviously, there are sort of caveats around that, and that we are experiencing some significant supply chain issues that are occurring and very recently. So any forecasts that the team have looked at, we'll continue to revise that.
And we will have a further conversation about what that capital delivery plan looks like, but we're testing it quite hard. We had anticipated that that you would question us fairly hard on taking forward $52 million when we have $120 million of new capital. But, you know, you don't have to work too hard, as we've been doing with the officers, to say when you think about the stuff that you see, like $50 million worth of water infrastructure projects in construction. We're in the market at the moment for millions of dollars worth of growth-related work, roads and services for multiple land developments. Starts to add up pretty quickly, and whilst we're still testing this and need to bring it back, we have a relatively good confidence level, unbelievably, when you think about the trajectory we've been on, that we will probably do a capital delivery somewhere in that $120, $130 million this fiscal year.
Aaron? Oh, sorry, Eileen. Councillor Lawson.
Thank you. Look, I've just got a query about the carry forward summary. I just would like to understand when, under the heading critically, and you've rated various carry forwards differently, can I just get an explanation of how that's prioritised, how that status is given?
Is that how it's broken down between the two rating areas?
Yes. So it's page 31.
Oh, right. Sorry.
So maybe I'll have a go. So the criticality of those projects generally are ones that are either well underway and we just have to finish them. There's some very, very strong importance requirements around them to meet standards. You know, drinking water upgrade projects is one sitting there with a high criticality. Other projects that have a strong impetus and underway, like Lowe's Pit, the trunk sewer mains, Eastern Interceptor, they're all projects that are essentially very important. They're either well planned or well underway and will be delivered this year. There are others, you know, the town clock, for example, that does need to go back out to the market. The criticality around replacing that's not quite in the same vein as upgrading our trunk sewers or finishing our drinking water program. So that's just some of that what that's trying to articulate.
Councillor Barber.
Yeah, kia ora. It's on table capital year-end report. I know we're doing a lot on the drinking water space. It probably takes up most of that water, the three waters, it would be drinking water. In terms of our stormwater services budget against what we've actually delivered is quite a way off. You know, do we carry forward everything, or is there a point where we get to say, actually, we might have to put this off for a couple of years until such time as we can actually do it?
Well, we don't carry forward everything, and we do look at things depending on how they're funded differently. So if it's a rates-funded activity, we've already collected the rates for that purpose. If there's still a strong likelihood that that's going to be delivered, then we carry it forward regardless, because we've already collected the funds for that purpose. If it's debt funding and that project is now looking like it's either unlikely to proceed or is going to be some years out, then we won't carry that forward. We'll look at rebudgeting that at some other point in time. So the carry forwards that we've got that we bring forward are either projects that are imminent, they're underway, or some of them are even under construction now. It's just they haven't been completed in the financial year that they were anticipated to be delivered upon, or they're imminent. So I think a really good proportion of what we're carrying forward into next year are projects that will be delivered next year. I think some of the stuff that's probably a little bit more up in the air is the stuff around the growth-related projects, even though we're hitting the market with some pretty big contracts around the likes of Howard Street and a few others. But there are uncertainties around exactly when they'll start and how much of that will actually be delivered next financial year. So.
Thank you, Aaron. And now we come to the recommendations on page 34. We've had a mover and seconder for those. I'm going to put those recommendations. All those in favour, please say.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, I've got my...
Oh, well, that's just popped up. Mayor Hazelhurst.
I would like to ask about the renewals of wastewater services, and the $5 million variance. Could someone please explain to me, was that renewal of pipes? What part of that significant $10 million investment of wastewater wasn't delivered in the year? Page 29.
Through you, Madam Chair. I don't have the exact list of projects, but the largest one of those is a renewal of the manifold at the wastewater treatment plant. The first proposed approach was going to be significantly more expensive and almost unbuildable, so the team have been working through alternative scenarios, working with contractors, and that work is being scheduled through. So rather than pushing on with their first plan, they took a step back to go, is there a better way to do that? Also in there is a large portion is the trunk sewer replacements, which are under contract, as Mr. Allen has talked about. And this is that relining process, which is a multi-million-dollar project. So that is all underway under contract at the moment. The other two major ones, I can get a list of the projects so and get them supplied through.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll now put those recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Now, we have visitors in the chamber at the moment, and they are from Horse of the Year. And I will welcome to Matkin, Sophie Blake and Vicky Roebuck. They have a presentation for us.
First of all, I'd like to thank Hastings District Council for allowing us to come and talk to you today. And I'd just like to introduce, on my right is Sophie Blake, who's our event manager, who's going to talk in a minute around finances and everything else. And then on my left is Vicky Roebuck, who's contracted to us as our comms and marketing manager. And she was recommended from the Hastings District Council to do that for us, as she is an expert on Hastings, and she has worked with the Hastings District Council on a contractor's basis as well. Just like to say, first off, this is the first time we've actually had to cancel the event after 67 years. And this wasn't taken lightly at all. We spent a lot of time and effort trying to make sure that this event got there, and I think most of you have gone out on the showgrounds and seen that most of the marquees are up. The grounds were set up. The only thing we hadn't got set up yet was what was inside the marquees. So that was very disappointing. And what was really heartening was that when we did cancel the event, the amount of messages and the support we got from not just the equine community, but around New Zealand and around the world with messages. And in the whole Facebook pages, emails we got, there was never one negative response, which I found really good. And a lot of the riders and riders in that left money in as a donation for us to go forward. And I don't take that lightly. That, to me, that's our brand and our family that are doing that. And Sophie's going to touch on what also our retailers and some of our commercial people did as well. You guys know all about it, but, we do bring in up 5 million, between 5 million and 12, 16 million, depending on which report you read. And after the cancellation of the event, we still had all the people that had booked their accommodation into Hawke's Bay still came down. It wasn't like they didn't come. They still came down, they still used their accommodation, they were still here. And so that was pleasing to see that the work we've done around our marketing has been working to get people to come down. And some of our key objectives this year was, increase awareness for Hawke's Bay, on Hastings, sorry. Should not say Hawke's Bay, but Hastings. And I think that's been done with the help of Vicky. And, you know, we've been succeeding in what were some of the issues that this council brought up last year around Hastings not being in the forefront of our marketing campaign. And, you know, on that, we are going to be moving forward to a better event next year. It was looking really good this year. Before we close, we had, what do we have? It's up there. 5% more riders turning up. Our trade sites were sold out. We had 400 volunteers already confirmed turning up. All our functions have been already sold out. So it was looking really good. It was very disappointing to sell. So I'm going to hand it on now to Vicky, who's just going to run us through our marketing and activation for 2022 and an overview for 2021. Oh, look at 2021 and overview 22. I'll get it right.
Okay. So you guys will know what the deliverables were, but we were all about promoting Hastings as a visitor destination and encouraging return visits. We were, generating visitor spend nights and hospitality, actively contribute to the positive brand reputation of Hastings through all media channels, and ensure prominent brand exposure for Hastings District Council and Hastings District, including but not limited to, at the show, welcome signage, jumps, the venue, and obviously advertising and marketing. So when I came on board, we had a quick look at some of the things that could be maximised and found some opportunities to further promote Hastings within the Land Rover Horse of the Year show and marketing, which we implemented. And those were, the first thing we did was we introduced a Hastings content stream on the social media channels, heroing key locations and assets such as Splash Planet, Cape Kidnappers, East Block, Tomato Peak, etc. So actually letting people know what they were coming for and what they could expect. All relevant social media posts carried the Visit Hastings hashtag, and that sort of in the last 6 months that reached 189,530 people on Instagram and 233,000 on Facebook. We ran a 3-week winner weekend to Hastings campaign, and it's important there that we just undertook to, Hastings is within Hawke's Bay, and we always talked about that, but Land Rover Horse of the Year, its home was Hastings, and we just made sure that all the comms reiterated that. So it wasn't winning a weekend to Hawke's Bay, it was winning a weekend to Hastings within Hawke's Bay. And it was a 3-week campaign, and entrants got to select their preferred weekend, and we had 4 different options for them where they could pick what suited them best, but all packages included tickets to the show and different Hastings experiences and accommodation. We also increased venue signage. We had TV broadcasts confirmed from Sky Sports Live and The Crowd Goes Wild, who were obviously coming to Hastings to broadcast. We added the Hastings Heart of Hawke's Bay logo to all print and digital advertising, and I'm embarrassed to say that that needed to be done, but obviously there were some hiccups in the past. And we also added it to the website. We introduced a Discover, so this is some of the marketing here, and you can just see just subtly the Hastings in the right-hand corner. But of course, again, anywhere that those digital ads were placed, they carried the Visit Hastings hashtag as well. And we also introduced a Discover Hastings section to the database EDMs, and there's 11,000 recipients on those, and again, that's where we were heroing locations and just letting people know, hey, spend another day when you're here outside of the show. These are all the great things that are waiting for you in Hastings. And there they are, you just sort of see them down there. Sorry. And we also undertook a large digital campaign, which also hadn't been done, so really targeted tracking people so we could see where they were coming from and what interested them. And for 2022, we're looking forward for the website, obviously, sorry, I'm jumping around. So I'm just going to the last page. Yeah, the lovely My Hastings there, but these are just some of the other channels we use. New Zealand Horse and Pony, obviously all of the Hawke's Bay regional channels. We had a radio promo with NZME, yay or nay. So interesting facts about the show in Hastings. That was my favourite. And we did, just lots of different things outside of town. Again, making sure that people had to come in and interact in some way to say something about Hastings to be in to win. Looking ahead for next year, we will be introducing a Hastings section to the website. We couldn't get that up and running this year, but we certainly will be growing that. We are going to do additional activations outside of Hawke's Bay, continue to work with Hastings and Hawke's Bay Tourism on collaborative activations for the show and Hastings. And then the other thing we're really trying to concentrate on is understanding the riders and their research. We're trying to conduct some, because like Tim said, we know they come, but what we really want to know is just what are they doing, what are they spending, and how many times they return, and how we can entice them back in the shoulder seasons, because we know they're here for the show, but let's bring them back in the middle of winter when we could do with some, heads on beds. So lots more in plan, and obviously more business as usual. So I feel Hastings is in good hands for Horse of the Year, and hopefully you do too.
So, Sophie's just going to go on about finances going forward and past.
And I haven't got any pretty pictures, sorry, because it's, financials are very pretty. So firstly, I just want to say again, the overwhelming support we got from our stakeholders, sponsors and riders and trade sites. Tim touched on it, but financially I saw it and was absolutely mind blown and felt so humble that it's a family, and that's what Tim said. So financials, I'm not going to go through page by page because it's quite a long document. But the event itself, so we do a financial of the event result and then the bottom result. So the event itself actually made a deficit of 138,000. Now, we don't like deficits, but in the circumstances we found ourselves, we were actually quite pleased with that. Now, of the revenue of the financials, I just want to acknowledge that 360,000 still came from sponsors. And obviously, Hastings Council was a huge part of that, and we want to thank them for that. And 314,000 came from our riders. Now, the riders didn't even come to the show. They didn't even get their horse on the float, and they still $314,000. So huge respect to them. The cool thing about that to me too is to personally feel like the riders have now got a small little buy-in of our show. We've got 2,000 shareholders now just go for it. So that gives us such support going through. However, we had the Domestic Event Fund, which, as we came in here last year and said with that, we got that last October, that gave us the confidence to deliver a show in a very unknown circumstances and situation. And so the Domestic Event Fund actually brought the event surplus, not-for-profit surplus, to 49,000 profit. So we haven't hurt our balance sheet, we haven't hurt anything. And as you all know, our balance sheet's been a little bit sad over the past few years. So with that, I want to carry on, I want to carry on to cash flow. So in our financial statement on page 12 of the financials, it looks like we're rolling in it. We've got $545,000, but we actually haven't. 330,000 of that is actually money held from people to apply to this year's invoices. So they've said to us, we want to help you with cash flow. So as a board, we will constantly be looking at the liabilities of that. Obviously, you can't just keep spending everyone's money. So our working cash flow going into this financial year, which is 1st of June, was $215,000. So as you can imagine, with an income that doesn't come till March, apart from sponsors through the way, we're already eating into that already. So we're watching it very closely, and that's one thing that I always make sure the board is very aware of our situation at all times. So that leads me into the, unless there's any questions about the financials. Does anyone have any questions about those? Oh, that's good. Okay, so moving into the financial stability of the event. 5 years ago, we sat here with a deficit of with an equity deficit of $269,000. We're proud to say that we're sitting here now with an equity of a positive 210. Now, as you know, that sounds good, but we need at least about 300, 500, probably more 500, to ensure we don't have to keep on putting our hand up. So we want to keep building on that. So going forward, our biggest goal is to not eat into our surplus. We are finally gaining. We have to have a surplus out of respect of our shareholders and our riders and our stakeholders, and we can't be a liability sitting there just waiting for the next COVID event. So the reason I'm bringing all this up is I just want to say that the biggest thing for us moving forward is strengthening and stability. So when it comes to We're making sure that all the time, as is new, Trish, our logistics manager, if you've met Trish, she is constantly keeping an eye on what the regulations are coming through for COVID, and as they come through, we'll implement these into the budget and see if we've got a budget line for it. We know they're coming. We know we're going to have huge regulations to fit to, but we will deliver an event in line all the time, checking in with Naomi and Tanya to make sure we're fitting in and they're assisting us with the matrix and things like that. So we've got to be constantly working with our stakeholders to deliver the event. Funding. Once again, we're extremely grateful to the support we receive from Hastings Council. We really appreciate your support on this and your buy-in on it. Your investments actually, your investment in the event has an economic benefit of $7 million, which Tim touched on before, and it also provides an amazing showcase for Hastings. Moving forward, when managing expenses, we'll be navigating our way through the unknown government regulations. We'll probably, what we're going to do, we did have a shareholders meeting a little month ago, 3 weeks ago. Due to the situation we're finding ourselves in the environment, we will be doing like a 3-monthly report back to our shareholders, not in the chambers, but we'll be doing open financial reviews as we go along in these unknown times. So last year, the domestic event fund was a one-off. We have looked at other funding options. We have gone to the government agencies we know to see if there's anything available to help us come through. The answer's been a big capital NO. So we're going forward strong, but with that, I'd like the council to recognise the significance of our event. Yes, and it's the funding sitting there of 150,000, which is fantastic, thank you. But we'd like to implement instalment funding structure that supports us going ahead to deliver an event in the circumstances which won't happen, that it was cancelled again. I would like the funding to be put towards, obviously, yes, KPIs, but to be put towards the longevity of the event more than anything. So to show your support in that way. You've got a 3-page document explaining what I'm asking there anyway. So if there's any questions on that, feel free to ask away.
So just following up on Sophie, look, it is the board's intention to have a cash reserve. Our intention is not ever to come back to the Hastings District Council as in the past and ask for money when we've run it at a loss. But also our intention with the cash reserve is that once we meet that, we're already in discussions with the Hastings AMP showgrounds that we want to start putting money back into those grounds as a board and to develop those grounds. So that's our intention going forward. We're hoping to have this event in Hawke's Bay out to 2036, hopefully, if we can do that, and that'll give us a surety around doing those much needed repairs on those grounds that are actually not fit for purpose as we speak. Regarding COVID, look, the board's taking every avenue to look at where can we get underwriting. I've approached every minister that I can think of in Labour, National, Act, I've talked to them, trying to see if we can get an insurance program running for major events where the major events pay a premium, and we may not call on that money, but at least it's there if we do get to the stage where 1 week out and we're having to pull it again because of COVID. So I assure you that we are looking at COVID every week, and Sophie and I and the rest of the team are spending an awful amount, a lot of time just working around how we're going to manage COVID in 2022. And just lastly, look, I'd really like to thank Sophie and Trish and Deb and Vicky here, the team. We've got a very small team now that's based in Hawke's Bay. We've bought it in-house, so it's all in Hawke's Bay. It's not in Auckland or anywhere else again. And look, the work they have put in the last few months since we've had to cancel the event has been outstanding, and I just really want to thank them on my behalf for the hard work they've done. So that's our report. If there are any questions, I suppose I'll leave it to the chair.
Thank you.
I'm so used to being chair.
Councillor Corbyn.
Thank you very much for the report, and I understand the difficult situation you're in following last year. But I do have 2 questions. You talk about having a $500,000 reserves to get to a sustainable position. And you've just mentioned, I guess when you get beyond that, that you'll be looking to invest in upgrading the A&P showgrounds from profits from then on. At that point, will you still be looking for grants from council to underpin your revenue stream, or do you think the event will be self-sustaining when you get to the 500,000?
That's a really hard question to answer because, frankly, I don't know. But it would be nice to think that we would be self-sustaining. But as a board, it's always nice to get some money from the council to do a marketing campaign for Hastings and to push it. But I think we'll cross that bridge as we get close to it. The event's not getting any cheaper. You know, we've got minimum wage has gone up, which has added considerable amount of money onto our bottom line. We are looking at a number of more costs. So yeah, let's cross that bridge as we get to it, I think.
Yeah. No, I was talking about surpluses, which come out, which is the result after costs, beyond, you know, once you get to that 500,000. The second question I've got is, just about every event that we see says there's an economic benefit to the region of 4 to 5 million. And the figures that you presented here, are they forecasted from a model, or are they actually measured as actual economic benefit for the region? So and if it is measured, what was the measurement? How was that determined?
We, with the help of the Hastings Council here, we've had two reports. One was 2018 and 2013, I think, was, and I can't remember the name who did it, but we got someone in that actually did the modelling for us. So one of them was, I think, close to 16 million, and the other one was down to 5 million. It was 12 million, 5 million.
Yeah, my question wasn't whether it was modelled in advance, it was actually measured.
That was actual.
Actual.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bruce might be able to fill us in a bit more on that.
Excuse me, can you come to the microphone just for the community? Thank you. You can have mine. Yeah, there you go.
Through your chair, so that stuff is all, I don't think there's anything precise about it. There's never an actual number that we can actually absolutely hang our hat on. But there's a whole lot of factors that are put into the model to understand exactly what that, well, not exactly, to estimate what the benefit is to the region. That could be, you know, through number of visitors, how long they stay, where they stay. There's a lot of information that's captured by the Horse of the Year team from the participants and from people that are visiting the show as well. So all those ingredients are put into a calculation to try and determine what the likely benefit is. And I think, you know, and how you calculate that is probably why you've got that variance that Tim referred to as well. But we have engaged professional economic advisors for that work.
Just to follow up to that, so I think we're talking about roughly more than ours, but we do get economic indicator reports, and as part of that report is a consumer spending report, which actually measures the amount of consumer spend in the district. And I would think it would be quite easy to identify the period that the course of the year is on, and actually measure the amount of consumer spending during that period, and compare it to other periods, and just see the uplift of consumer spending as a result of the event year. I know it's not going to capture pre-bookings, etc., but I think it would be a good indicator of the economic benefit to the region. Just narrowing the consumer spending by breakdown.
Thank you. Councillor Redstone.
Thank you, Chair. One of your objectives is to increase ticket revenue. I'm just wondering how you're going to, what does that mean, and how are you going to achieve that?
Yeah, so one would be numbers through the gates. Obviously, making sure that we target as much, and obviously Vicky might be able to jump in too, but local people, bringing them to give them more reason to come to the show. It's not just a horse. And that's one thing that Vicky and I are working largely on, is the hospitality offerings, the fun part of it. And then also implement functions that actually attract people to come for a 2-3 day period. So we touched on the VIP ticket experience. So we just want to up the offerings and the reason to come. Like people go to the races, but it's not necessarily to look at the horse go around in circles. So we want people to come to the show to actually enjoy, come to the region, make a weekend of it, and that's why we're working big in that area. It's going to take a few years to get pick up. If you want to, yeah.
And also spreading the, because obviously we're very busy on the weekends, but we've got capacity Tuesday, Wednesdays, Thursdays, so trying to bring people into those. And also there's a community engagement program that sits around that as well that we didn't touch on, and obviously this is not revenue through the gates, but it is, it's the schools, it's Hastings families and how they get to engage with the show and have fun and understand what's happening right on their doorstep as well. So
that was partly where my question was coming from, because I think there is a large sector of the community that couldn't afford the gate price. So just making sure that we can cover more of the community.
Actually, what I didn't mention,
I was going to say, why did you mention
what I didn't mention was had the show gone ahead this year, we were bringing in Free for All Friday. So the show would have been free from 3 o'clock for everyone, and we had changed some of the scheduling, so there were some high profile classes for them to watch. There was going to be some sort of family entertainment. We had a new family zone where kids could come, they could touch a pony, they can pin the tail on the pony and actually really get involved, and that would have all been free.
It's not a real pony, eh?
The tail would not have gone on that one. And obviously the other thing is with that schools program coming in, actually a bit of education around horses and ponies and, nutrition care and how you care for a pony. That was sort of some of the big things we had.
Yeah, we had the local pony club, actually Tim's daughter, had the local pony club girls all rostered to 2 or 3 at a time in a marquee to teach the kids coming in that would dream of a pony, what it's like to own a pony, not just one in the paddock, one actually to compete in that. We had tack sheds of all different disciplines where they could touch saddles, brushes, what's a frog and a frog, like real educational. So keeping it horsey, but really educational.
And we were also working with Boss Dog and producers, so the kids could actually have their morning tea, they could have a free apple, all of that sort of stuff. So we really wanted them to understand that this was a great thing for Hastings, but also it was a great thing for them and how it made sure they felt part of it. That was really important this year.
Happening this year.
Well,
yeah.
22.
Thank you, Councillor Sholem.
Thank you, Chair. Just like to take a moment first of all to acknowledge the challenging times in which you in particular are operating, and also the clear passion that event attendees have given what you've reported to us. I'd also like to just say I feel heard based on what you've just said, and also the promotional work that's gone into actually bringing Hastings as a brand to the forefront. And that's really positive because I think that's the first time I've received a report from Horse of the Year and felt that our concerns have been heard and addressed. So I would like to take the opportunity to acknowledge that.
Absolutely.
Just to put some clarity on the recommendations through you, Chair, reading through them, as I understand it, we're just receiving the statement of intent today, and D is really just a change to timing rather than approving anything else. Great, thank you. On that basis, I'm very happy to move the recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, and thanks for your presentation. I just wanted to check the 187K you received. Was that, and it was the regional, the domestic event fund, was that of the 600,000 contribution to Hawke's Bay Tourism, or outside of that?
Outside of that.
So you never received anything
We don't
from
get anything
Hawke's Bay
from them.
Tourism?
No, and I have talked to Hamish in detail, and they've earmarked that for sort of smaller wine and food. He gave me quite a good explanation why we don't receive anything. But it'll be quite a different event, but no, that was definitely from the Domestic Event Fund, and we had to apply for it in quite a lot of detail.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sears.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, just a kind of detail question regarding next year. I can't remember if we talked about it here or if it was a discussion somewhere else, so I'm actually not sure if it's true. But there was a discussion around this year's Horse of the Year around food being supplied to competitors and how food was coming in and out and pre-orders with supermarkets, etc. And that was at the exclusion perhaps of some of our local producers. So I'm interested to know how you're looking at food and connection with farmers market, local food producers, etc. for next year's show?
So I'll be having a meeting with them. We're going to try and, we want to introduce the markets back into the show. Obviously the markets are there on Sunday, and we have got a sponsorship with New World, but we're trying to work, this year we're just starting, just for a trial, an area that showcases Hastings food, like it's going to be called the Alley, and it's where we're going to bring in coffee supplies and the pastries and pixies, and actually like a little cafe where we will showcase Hastings sort of branding. We want to trial that area this year and see if it works. But yeah, we will need to be. We didn't, we sort of missed the mark a little bit last year, just the timing. But it's definitely on our mind, and we will be talking to the Hastings Farmers Market to make sure we keep it going.
So just to follow up, Madam Chair, if I can. So you mentioned you did have an arrangement or a sponsorship with the supermarket.
We have, but we're actually in contract for 3 years with New World.
So is that separate to a nice little market area? Is that compromising local producers being able to supply?
Yeah, the contract was signed prior to bringing the event in-house, and so that's honouring out, and they are an exclusive food supplier. So that's there, and not that I'm saying we want to get rid of them, because it is Hastings New World, and obviously it's great, but we will be looking at much more ways of implementing the Hastings markets next year after we trial this alley. If it works, we'll extend on that.
Sophie, am I right that aren't they only a sponsor in terms of pre-delivered food onto the grounds? Is that right?
Fresh produce.
Yeah.
So produce. So it's a fine line, and most of the markets that wanted to attend was produce. So it kind of, but we definitely, we just wanted the year, just to get 1 year under our belt of bringing the event in-house. But all those things are definitely on the top of our mind all the time.
It's definitely a priority from a marketing point of view, because Hastings, we're all about food and wine production, so making sure that we can try to experience that in the show. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nixon.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I was disappointed it was cancelled last year. I always buy a new set of hats and things down there. Couldn't do it last year. Hope I can do it this coming season. The question I've got is, when Horse of the Year's on, a lot of the accommodation that doesn't get that well utilised normally fills up. Motels that perhaps not on the top shelf. But this year, as I understand, a lot of them are being used for emergency housing. Have you taken that into account? Do you have any thoughts on what you might do to sort of alleviate that situation? And not only here, but also in Hastings and Napier.
So for our direct accommodation required for our event, that's a year round. We've lost 2 hotels now to, actually we're about to possibly lose another. So our officials, we use 600 beds over the week. They're sorted, but B&Bs, I jumped online to book a few B&Bs for people, and they're filling up, and the prices have gone up of those as well. People are utilising the B&Bs. That's probably all we can really, but it is a struggle. We had trade sites ringing us last year saying, we're arriving, didn't even think. I think the mindset for a lot of people when they come to Hawke's Bay is, there'll be heaps of accommodation, it's just Hawke's Bay. And it's like they get here and go, we can't get any accommodation. So accommodation actually is a struggle for our event. Not for our event to put on that way, but for people coming to the event, accommodation can actually be a barrier.
I was just hoping that you had thought of it.
A vision, a dream that we'd like, and we've talked to Naomi about, is obviously there's a lot of people on horse trucks that are camping, and how we can get them, they're in the showgrounds anyway, so how can we get them to stay for an extra night either way, and what other locations around Hastings could we utilise and encourage other people to jump in, you don't have to be horsey, bring your camper van and have a really good week in Hastings anyway. Obviously COVID makes it a bit trickier to move forward with, but I think it's safe to say our vision would be, every bed in every spot is rammed with people coming to Hastings even if they come to the show for 1 day, that's fine. If they spend 3 days doing other things in Hastings, that's a win.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barber.
Kia ora. Just kind of on that similar line, most of the food, beverage, kind of the cocktail things are all done on the site of Horse of the Year. Has there been any thought of bringing some of that into the CBD, I don't know if that would work, but one of the evening things, you could have that Toitoi. I mean, Toitoi is fully available now. It's just that it's located on the side of the city, and sometimes I think people will go there. They won't leave the horses there. They just pack up and leave once they're finished. So it's just about trying to get some things in the CBD. Yeah, have you given any thought to that? And the other question is, would a horse of the year without Auckland, is that a feasible kind of? No, not feasible. Yeah, I didn't think so.
Well, I'll start answering. I think, Your Worship, we talked about trying to bring something into the CBD, our parade or something during the time or beforehand. And I know Sophie and Vicky have probably been working on something like that. I'm not sure what that is yet, and not sure what that could look like. They may have a better idea with that one. But Auckland and level 2, look, the government regulations are changing all the time, so we don't know, but we cancelled the last event because Auckland was in level 2, because the advice we got was they had to bring down their level. So we couldn't run an event with level 2 people sitting in it, and we'd have to be the policeman on the door.
And last year was Auckland and Northland, which brought the percentage to 40% attendees.
And it wouldn't have been, the title classes wouldn't have probably been title classes because 40% of our competitors wouldn't have been there.
But you're part of the logistics that you had from the shareholder meeting is constantly modelling to look at the different scenarios and being able to react accordingly. So this year, it couldn't have gone ahead with Auckland like that, but the ideal is to, if there's a chance to run the show, I think let's run the show.
We have got in place that we're working on, which I ran through with Tanya Jack the other day, is that we have got an ABCD kind of overview, which we haven't put the levels into that yet, because I don't know about you, but I could plan 110 scenarios of what could be the next new level. So we'll put the levels in there as they come through. But the biggest thing is just to make sure we change the show as we need to, and to adapt to them. What was your second question? There was a second question.
About them coming and trying to, yeah. Personally, we would love that. I think that's the whole point, because you're in the showgrounds, and the showgrounds are beautiful. But hey, like say 5 minutes down the road, come and have a look. So what we were doing for this year is all the rider packs, we're going to get a voucher sheet for businesses in the CBD. So a 2-for-1 lunch or a free coffee if you did. So trying to encourage them to come in and spend some money. And look, personally, we'd love to do some sort of parade, but I'd love to have a progressive horse of the year street around, and they come in and they do, and we lay something on for them. And funnily enough, the big thing they all asked is, can we get discounted tickets to Splash Planet? So, so we put up a post about Splash Planet, and it just went gangbusters with the, can they open specially for us on one day? And can we get tickets? So the willingness is definitely there.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr.
Thank you for your presentation, all three of you. I'm looking at the financial forecast under the draft statement of intent. And my question is, you've got your, for the event 22, and I'm interested what those numbers are compared to a potential full noise, nail it, perfect weather, everybody turns, no risk. I'm really interested in how pruned have you put the 22 figures compared to what the potential could be?
I'll answer that. The board's thing to Sophie is that we do it at the worst case scenario if we run the event. So that would be...
So conversely, what's the gap? Is there another $500,000 potential? Is it 200,000? Is it $50?
Probably what?
Gate numbers aren't, I probably want to say the smallest. The gate numbers out of that whole, like 2-something million, are like 140,000 of it. So if we at least got another 50 through, I think our show, regardless of what's happening in the social environment, riders and the key part of our show has not changed up and down. That has been quite static and strong.
Okay.
And it's already, like planning for 22 is already, we've already 90% trade sold out. So we're looking already, and I can tell you by March, if the horsey people are going to be crying for events. They've pretty much all been cancelled to December, so they'll just be trotting along. Sorry, but yeah, I'm always reporting to the board on a very conservative side because I don't like to be caught out.
So if we increased our gate by even 10%, that's another, 15, 20 grand, so.
And increasing our gates isn't always just a financial benefit. It's obviously, it might look like a small financial benefit, but it's the people coming, it's the sponsors, it's the Hastings, it's the people coming to Hastings. One thing I just wanted to touch on too is out of our 25,000 people that attend, only 3,500 of those people stay on site.
Oh.
So they're out there somewhere eating, shopping, staying somewhere. Going, and your comment about do we want to do a function outside of the grounds? Yes, we'd love to, but they are going to the restaurants. You do try and get a table on that Horse of the Year week, and you'll be. It's a good. It's a good week to stay home if you're from Hawke's Bay, from Hastings, because it's the restaurants are all booked out.
Yeah. Through you, Madam Chair, if there's not a seconder, I'm happy to second it, and also to acknowledge that we've tried to get dinner that week, coincidentally, and gone. Well, you can come in at 5:15, but you've got to be gone by 6. Town was heaving.
Well, thank you. Just before I put that recommendation, yes, echoing Councillor Shollam's comments, sometimes when we've had presentations, I've sat and ground my teeth at the constant allusions to Hawke's Bay, and I love the way that you've repackaged things up, and I love the way in which you have put Hastings front and centre, and I'm certain even if other councillors haven't mentioned it, that is really appreciated because that's where you are, yeah. And so that's fantastic. So I'd like to put those recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? Carried. Thank you. And now we'll have a lunch break. Thank you. My whole family. Yeah, no, well, that's right. But I remember your mum was on the PTA. Oh, yeah. I was assistant principal there. Oh, yeah. I was between Miss something or other, Smith, Yes, and Murray Fitzsimons. Oh, yeah. And
Just before we go on live, or shall we go on live and sing happy birthday to our chief executive? All right, well, we'll do it before we go live. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Nigel. Happy birthday to you. Hip hip. Hip hip. Hip hip.
Thank you. Welcome back to the second part of our operations and monitoring meeting. And we're now up to item 9, and I would like to welcome Mr O'Shaughnessy, Group Manager Planning and Regulatory, to talk us through his report.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. If councillors go to page 41, or I think that's the same on your iPads. And then if I could just indulge you to go to the first graph, which is on the next page over on 42. It's titled Building Consents Granted. As you've heard from a lot of media, and also obviously from the issues that are being raised in terms of supply chains, disruption to building processes, etc., we've had the same type of environment we're working in. So we've gone from roughly in 2019-20 for 1,419 consents, and then in our last year we've jumped to 1,710, and as you know, a substantial number of those are new house consents. And then we've been a bit conservative. We believe we'll probably get another 10% possibly of residential consents in the next following year, because just the subdivisions that we know are lining up, and that's the likes of obviously Howard, Wainako, our own Tarbert Street, reaching consent stages of Brookvale, possibly some more consents in Iona. And really where we're at is we're in the situation where we've had a substantial amount of work. We've got one offer out at the moment for an inspector, and we're waiting to hear if that offer's been accepted. But you can see when you drop down to the next, building consents by month, you can see we had quite a peak again in March, April, and then also estimated value. We had some very big dollar terms coming through in that same period, and some of those quite big consents.
So if I could, through you, Chair, I mean, to be straightforward, I mean, as we've talked about previously in council, this is an area where, really struggling to meet the standards, either statutory or in terms of the, I guess, the desired level of performance that we want in terms of responding to growth. We've done a number of things that we've talked about over the last quarter in terms of some investments and some smarter technology, the consent clock, the streamlining of some processes. Obviously, we're a couple of meetings into the establishment of the building advisory group, working with the sort of builders and sort of designers. But we thought, I think your direction to us is every quarter we're reporting on this, and I think John's recommending that we're going to move to whilst we'll continue to do that, more regular reporting monthly. I mean, we're working hard, but right now, to be really straightforward, it's an area that we're not where we want to. We're not where we want to be. John and I get weekly reporting in the planning and sort of building area, and what I'd say right now is that we're kind of, and it's not the news that we'd like to be telling you. It's not getting worse. We're holding, our sort of own at the moment, And it's it's going to be the combination of trying to get some more people and continuing to look at, some of these process and technology, because the factor, I guess, of where we're at right now, it is a volume, quality and risk equation, and the factors of productivity are kind of people, technology and process. We are working hard with the building advisory sort of group, looking at some of our sort of processes, but we are it's where we're at. We're working hard to get better, and I know it's not great to be saying, hey, look, we try not to be the best of a bad bunch in terms of councils, but equally we're not yet in the position that some councils are having to formally write to MB as the regulator and say we are now out at 60 days in terms of statutory timeframes, because there is a lot of pressure, as we know, just around the level of activity. But we wanted to just bring factually, this is where things are at currently in terms of actual volumes, forecast, and where we're at against our statutory requirements.
Thank you.
And if I could just add, we now do a 20-day letter that came out of the building advisory group where we know we're not going to get the consent out. We'll get the letter out to the person saying, hey, there'll be delays, because that, and also the other thing that came through really loud and clear from that group was consistency in processing, making sure that our staff are working in a similar fashion. And also we did quite a bit of streamlining by looking at where we could simplify even tables. We're sending out tables now that people can fill out on the individual things and then send it straight back to us. So we've done a number of, and also we've dropped some of the reviews. We are picking and choosing the risky ones as opposed to reviewing all consents to get the numbers pushing through.
Probably the last thing that's worth mentioning that's not included in here, and as I say, John and I pretty focused on this, get reporting every week. One of the dynamics that doesn't necessarily show up in these numbers that's at play at the moment with the supply chain issues is quite big numbers coming in for amendments to building consents with product substitution, because products that consents were granted for aren't available. So, there's just a bunch of dynamics that are at play here. And I know that doesn't take away from, the fact that we want to, be responding well to growth, and we want high levels of service, but this is, what the picture looks like.
And just before we move to questions, can I just have a couple of queries? Number one is, taking on board what Nigel has said, what our CEO has said about product substitutions, what impact does that have? Because are those products that are being substituted, do they come with the same, or do our staff have the same knowledge of some of those product substitutions?
Yeah, so our building staff have taken a reasonably practical attitude where they consider minor variation, dealing with them out in the field. But if they're new cladding systems and they won't necessarily have a coal mark or a performance mark, we're being very careful to make sure that they have got the right ones, because otherwise we're going to just create a liability issue with possibility of failures of cladding in some types of systems. So they're being careful in that regard, but where there's a practical minor variation they can do on site, pretty much like for like, or a product that performs them, but probably cladding and window systems are the ones where you have to be the most careful.
And my second question is the fact that Kāinga Ora is going to be doing their own consenting, has that kicked in yet?
It has. They've stopped submitting the residential consents, but they've got an interest. They'd do one consent or two consents, and they may have quite multiple consents in them. But we've had to, all the consents that were in, they've let them run through. So we've done all the inspections and finished those. Yeah. But it should help us with our numbers.
That's just what I was going to ask. What impact?
I think it may help, but I guess the issue is we're seeing an upsurge in our residential, excluding some of their work.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Mayor Hazelhurst.
Thank you. Thank you, report, John. Could probably you, Nigel, advise me what is the situation across the region with other building departments, and is there any capacity to support us? And that's I've got another question after that.
Yeah, through you, Chair. The chief executives have met recently, as we've talked about with the mayors, and we're going to bring the GMs together. Everyone is in the same boat. Everyone's dealing. So if you look at Central Hawke's Bay, dealing with, in their context, record levels of things, 300 house subdivisions. So from a planning and a consenting point of view, for Napier, Central Hawke's Bay and Hastings, we're all in the same boat. But the chief executives have made a commitment to say, look, the borders are closed. You can't bring at this stage in people from overseas. There's hot competition for the skills that are needed in the industry. But what we need to do is collectively look at, are we maximising the sharing of resource and knowledge across the three councils, because we're all in this together. We're all facing the same challenges.
My second question is, John, can you talk me through the process of how we communicate with that client? And, for us, people pay a lot of money for this process. It's an expensive process that they pay us to deliver. Can you talk me through the communication from the beginning to the end?
Yeah.
Communicating with the client.
So, what we find is the people who come into the front counter, they will talk to our front counter staff. Sometimes if it's a complicated consent and we know that'll have implications across servicing, we'll organise a meeting with the engineering staff and try and work through their issues. And that's pre-submitting of a consent. And when it comes in, you have a situation where they go through a plan check, make sure the basic items are there, and then it goes up onto the floor in level 2 and it gets allocated. And when it's accepted, generally a letter goes out to the person saying that's been, basically received and beginning processing. And then the first thing that happens is there's an assessment done of what information's there and is it all acceptable or not. And that's your what you call an RFI letter. An RFI letter will go out to the both the client and the owner, because that came out of one of our group meetings where the owners weren't aware of what was going on in the process. So I know there's pushback from a number of the designers and professionals, but what happens is they both get the RFI letter, and then what happens is it comes back in terms of the information gets provided. Sometimes it's accurate, sometimes it's not. And that, as you may remember, in that Crow report, that was identified as the single biggest delay is the turnaround time and getting information back. So once that information comes back in, it gets processed, and then the consent is issued. Now, there's two channels. There's some that go to contractors and some that are done in-house. When they go out to a contractor, they've got to, within 3 days, got to be allocated and out to a contractor, and the same process happens. And previously, there'd been additional checking going on in the department before they're issued, but what we're doing now is there's a very quick overview check, and then the consent is issued. And then what happens is the person will book their inspections, and then there's, say, depending on the type of thing, it's 5 to 8 inspections. And when that work's completed, they will generally call for their final inspection, and then you go out there and check all the things. Now, sometimes there's a code-compliant schedule that'll go with it, if there's, as an example, lifts or anything else in the building. And generally, there would be a situation where there might be site works to be done around the site, paths, drainage, all that type of thing. They're lastly picked up at that final inspection. And so a lot of it depends on two things, really, is how good your professional is in providing the information, and then we are striking delays on building sites where people can't get materials and the inspections need to be put off. But we've managed to, pretty much when we got the go-ahead, when we stepped down a level, our inspectors could get back out on the road. So that's the very broad process, but there are lots of technical aspects like fire reports, various things that may be required, depending if it's a multi-storey building or a relatively simple residential.
If I could just add, because I think where you're coming from, Your Worship, in addition to what John said, from a communications point of view, I think we've already made some changes. I think there's scope to do more. So I think part of the feedback that we've had, and John, you've already mentioned that one of the things is once the application's in, it's not necessarily that there's a delay. It's that we don't, can we communicate better with the customer? So part of, just part of the, some of the recent changes that have been implemented, or just being upfront, with the customer, with the applicant, saying, hey, we are experiencing delays. We're at 20 days. We're not meeting time frame. So I think we've started some more active communication, but part of it is, I think, the feedback that we've had is that not that there's delays, but when you don't know what's going on, has been part of the feedback that we've had.
And I think the feedback has been, if we're going to run over, give us a letter telling us that, and then we can rearrange contracting times and people to fit in with their construction schedule. So that's the most critical thing from the designer's point of view.
So, thank you for that, Nigel. I'm really supportive of us putting a comms person in there to look at the process, from the outset, that not waiting 20 days, that we are experiencing delays, that earlier, thank you for your receipt of your consent application. We are experiencing delays. I just think that if we had a comms person that looks over part of your group, the advisory group, and actually takes it from a customer's walking through the process. And I think that's what I'd like to see change, because there is the regulatory expertise, but actually we're providing a service here to the community, and we've been paid well for a service. So we have to treat, just like any other business out in our community has to treat that customer as though they're buying something. And that's what our service is. They're purchasing a service, whether it's your lawyer or your consenting officer. It's someone coming back to you and telling you what's going on. And I would like to think that we could take a different lens. Yes, we've got to get the technical expertise. Yes, we've got to get some more consenting officers. But there is a way in which I think that we could improve, and I'd just like that person to be on your committee to walk through your processes. Thank you, Wendy.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. John, have you got any predictions for what may happen in 2023 and beyond? Because what the building industry is telling me, or a builder I know, he's currently doing 2 houses. He's got 4 consents approved, but he can't get supplies. So he's not going to be requesting any more down the track. So any thoughts about that? I think 2022 is well and truly there, but beyond that.
I think you may get a situation where things start to slow up.
Yeah.
But I think what you will do is a lot of people will get their consents in and get it ready for when they can get the materials, or they'll do amendments. And so I think, because there's such a huge demand, and you've seen that in Tarbert, and I think you'll see that in Waianako and all those places, you're talking about sections that sold for pretty reasonable prices. Now it could be over 100,000, to buy a section, and then you're talking, say, 400,000 for number ones in Lyndhurst and those areas. So I think people will still get the consents, but also we've got to be careful that we've got some people heading towards retirement. So we're trying to plan to replace those people as well. So even if we have a drop-off in consents, we'll be able to get them out a heck of a lot quicker, but I can't see it happening for another 2 to 3 years. I think there's a pent-up or latent demand of housing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know we talk about this a lot. This has been a problem now for, I think, 4 quarters in a row. And you have implemented some of the things that we talked about last time that we thought might help. You've mentioned those. But looking at the figures, it doesn't look to me like they've actually significantly impacted on turnaround time. In fact, we're down at 60%. Is that right? They haven't...
Yeah, I think we're down at 61 or 62%. That's part of the quarter. And then the training's finished for this year. So it will improve, but still we're getting the numbers in the door. So it won't jump more than, say, 5 to 10%.
Follow up, Madam Chair. Given that we often talk in council around the two most important things to our ratepayers are water and building consents, and this problem is continuing, and I acknowledge all of the hugely difficult and complex reasons why, I understand all of them. I really think that we need to see some new thinking around solutions, because for ratepayers to, as Her Worship says, pay so well for a service which is expensive, and for it to be continually not delivered it's something that is just unacceptable actually to our ratepayers. So I think that given the problems, we need to find new solutions, and whether that's a huge financial change in the way we look at this, I think our ratepayers would be happy to look at that if they could get their consents within these 20 days. 60% receiving it within 20 days. I mean, that must be pretty close to the worst we can get, wouldn't it, Chief?
Well, in our recent history, but again, I don't want to sound defensive, because I actually acknowledge the points that are being raised. I mean, we're sitting here saying, look, we're not at statutory minimum, let alone the level of service that we want to be providing to our community. So, like, we know that. We're working hard on a bunch of things. There are some things that over the last year we put in place, as you're aware, like the outsourcing quite a lot of our work. We're in a space now. So yeah, I'm agreeing with you in terms of the innovation. So some of the things that we've innovated on, we've got no ability to give any more work to the outsourced contractors, because the outsourced contractors can't meet any of their myriad of customers. The National Building Processing saying, sorry, we're capping you at the level that you've got, because we can't get any staff. We can't meet our, service requirements to our customers. So I guess the space we're in, I agree with you, we're going to have to keep challenging ourselves, but the innovation can only come in, probably one of three, or a combination of three areas: process, technology, or our tolerance for risk. Because we have multiple customers here. We have the customers that are the fee-paying customers and the developers and the house builders, and we have customers that are the beneficiaries of what we do in a regulatory sense. That the last time we've got a council that doesn't have, in terms of our agreed risk appetite, a high appetite to potentially have intergenerational risk from regulatory failure. So it's a balancing across those three items, knowing that we're going to have to find some innovative solutions.
And to some extent, it is, well, to a large extent, it is a national problem. Yesterday, one of the big news stories was Christchurch and the huge problems they're having. So there isn't a council in the country that isn't suffering the same things. With the border closed, we cannot import people, and we could actually worsen the situation by getting into a bidding war with other councils over the same precious staff that everyone is short of at the moment.
I mean, there are some things through you, Chair, that we've found ourselves thinking that we're quite lucky about at the moment, that we're not in an area where Kāinga Ora are basically recruiting from councils for their own building consent authority, with the pressure on the price escalation that's sort of going on. So there are some challenges, but there are some things that John's KPI for this year is to have a measurable multi-year plan for how we lift the performance in this area. The challenges might be that we're going to have to bring and talk with you, is that it might some of the solutions might be medium term, that means that things get even tougher in the in the short term. So one of the active debates at the moment is we've been looking for fully qualified staff that don't need a lot of training, because if they need that, then the existing resources have to supervise, and there just aren't a lot of highly qualified people around. So one of the conversation is, well, when do we bite the bullet and say we might just have to take some people off the tools or grads and actually invest in training and accept that things might get worse for 6 months, but they'll get better in 12 or 18 months. So those are some of the things that we're actually having to.
We've got 6 or 8
actively
people training now to get the Reg 18 for 2 years, and previously in post the Christchurch earthquake, we were contracting down to them for nearly 12 months just to keep our staff. And of course, now our turn came and we go around all the other councils and we get reply, well, they're all busy, we can't, they've got no spare capacities. It's been a really interesting time, whereas, we were fortunate to be able to keep quite a few of our staff over that tough period, but nobody's giving up anyone, no one's giving up processing time at the moment.
Thank you, Chair. I'm deeply frustrated, both for our customers, but for our staff also, because I can see how this is a no-win situation, where you're already tapped out beyond capacity and you're trying to look at how you can institute processes or training that would just compound that issue further. So I do want to acknowledge that, both sides of the frustration. I'd like to echo Ms. Sandra's comments around, again, just reinforcing that need to be completely transparent right from the start of the process around the fact that the pressures we're under right now are meaning a high percentage are going over statutory requirement timeframes. And I just wonder, through you, Chair, hearing that this is very much a national issue, this is not just us, in terms of complying to the timeframes that are set out by MB, and given that we can't turn work away, so it's not like a normal business where you can say, sorry, we're at capacity, we can't take you now. Whether or not there's been any dialogue or is potential of dialogue with MB around challenging what can be done on a more national level around whether it's instituting and investing in motivating national training, looking at this as a national issue rather than leave it to councils to try to deal with in their own patch. Yeah. Can I please encourage that then?
I think that's a good idea, and the issue we're facing too is, if you've got someone who's working for you and is capable, like we lost two or three about a year ago, who went back out onto the trade, and then they've jumped companies, because everyone's running around.
Thank you. So the consenting timeframe is 20 days, is that right? 20 working days. Yeah. So when I look at that 62% compliance, I start to think about the 38% and what's happening with that, because there's a big difference between getting the consent done in 21 days compared with 61 days. So I think we should be looking at that as well, if that's possible, because that's the other indicator. That's just a comment. But the second one is a question. Who has set that consenting timeframe of 20 days?
Sorry, that's a statutory requirement by the government.
Yeah, and I note here that there's an increasing number of complexity consents coming in. Is there any possibility of having two timeframes, one for a standard consent and one for a complex consent? Because if everything was complex, 20 days just seems unreasonable.
Yeah, it really depends on some, like say you get a very good, engineer, very good company and good designers who've got good engineers, 20 days is doable, complex, but if you've got ones that have got, as an example, fire issues or structural issues, they can easily go out past that time. So I think it's something that we can raise with the government in terms of timing. Yeah, but I think it's good having that 20 days as our measurement.
Yeah, so you're supporting 20 days for all consents.
It would be great if you had more, but there's also a certain degree of competency in getting things done, because sometimes otherwise you can just, if you've got 30 days, it might take longer, and I think you try and treat them fairly, but some of our complex ones, they're aware of that the consent will take longer because they've got fire reports and peer reviews and things to do. They're not the big number. The big number in the bulk of residential housing in the middle. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it doesn't matter whether you're buying a fridge, motor vehicle, a jersey, or a house. Delays are really annoying, particularly when they're not what you expect. And I can't help wondering, because people know that there are delays, whether in fact they're not pouring more consents in, possibly ahead of their need, which is boosting demand, but actually isn't really necessary. And whether, if that is the case, and you can tell me if it is or isn't, whether it would be possible to have some sort of ranking system or something. Yeah, I mean, when you ring up the phone company to complain about something, or the bank, that's a better example because I'm always complaining to banks, they often they'll say, if you like to leave your phone number, we'll ring you back in an hour. It's normally 3, but it doesn't matter. And they do get back. So you take the pressure off them in the knowledge that they are going to get back to you, because that's the most annoying thing. You don't know what's happening. So just express that as, and as I said, I wonder if the shortages, and I'm not, when I say we're creating, I don't mean that in a criticising way, whether that may not be causing more demand, because people say, oh, bloody Hastings, it takes an awful long time to get a consent, so get it in fast, and so we sort of get caught in a situation that isn't necessary. And the last point, you can answer them all together because they're sort of mixed up. You can't ask for a consent for something unless you've got somewhere to put it, like a piece of land, basically. And do we sort of map out the availability of land? We used to. Availability of land is coming towards us, and that way sort of estimating what future demand is likely to be. I think Sam Faulkner, as you know, he does a lot of our estimation, and it's pretty accurate because we know councils generally are approving a subdivision 3 to 4, 5 months ahead of it. So we know it's coming down the thing. Probably commercial, industrial, not so clear.
No.
We know that's coming through. We do get some of the, interestingly, we get companies from out of Auckland, Hamilton, that working here, and they'll say, look, we've allowed this much time for the consent. So, you know, and it's generally well above the 20 days because they know it's complex. And so that's quite good because we can plan that work. There is a bit of people putting consents in, but I think the industry right across the board all know that there are delays. They get them in as soon as they can. And we have been refusing some really poor quality stuff that has huge numbers of mistakes at the front end to try and keep our processes running smoothly.
That helps me. And just picking up, somebody asked the question, might have been Sandra, I can't remember now, about sharing with others in the area, because once again, we're talking about, if the volume goes up, then there are opportunities for streamlining, maybe specialisation or, what do you call it, breaking the work into sort of logical modules. Are we in communication, particularly with Napier, which is the other big council, to see what opportunity there is to sort of start breaking this work down so that we can handle it more efficiently by specialisation and sharing with them?
Yeah. So as I said earlier, the chief executives have met. We are bringing the building teams together, and the intent is to look, given we've all got a shared problem, around what can we do to kind of lift our game, because we've got a lot of pressure right across the board. So the point I'd make is, I think we're looking at all the points that we can do to reduce what you'd call demand failure that just drives rework in the system. So that some of these initiatives around, and we've had support from industry around, don't accept substandard, consent applications. Push it back. And the industry pushing for that. With us, the thing that's a killer in all of this is a lack of, communication about what will happen and what will the time frame be. I can talk honestly on behalf of Hastings District Council, being a customer of John over the last 2 years, in terms of being an applicant for building consents. I can tell you what it's like, and this will be the stuff that people in our community are feeling every day with what this pressure looks like. I had Mr. Henson saying to me as I'm saying, shit, are we on track and why is that cost blowing out? And he's saying, well, I need to have, I need to have an inspection on this day because if the foundations aren't checked up from me, I miss the concrete pour and then I've got to wait 6 weeks and the cost's going to go up and we're going to get big delays. So this is the stuff that's playing out all the time. And so, what I've learned is that what you're wanting is a degree of certainty. Whether it's 4 weeks or it's because of all of these other things going on 6 weeks, because it's the not knowing and the uncertainty that just causes, a huge amount of, the issues.
You probably answer. I mean, certainty was what I was talking about because it just causes so many more problems.
Yeah, thank you. I met up with a person within the building supplies industry earlier this week and just given me some examples of what is happening out there, including while they're waiting for supplies, some of their workforce isn't even working because they're waiting and those types of things. And when we think about the wraparound services for the farming community, it's the construction sector as well that really, really feels it. And, obviously this week's Mental Health Awareness Week. And I look at our building consent team and they are part of that construction sector as well. So the more that we can put them all at ease and make the relationship and the process smoother and maybe more enjoyable and stuff, I think it's incredibly important. And I support what Mayor Sandra raised before. And it's communications, but it's also someone definitely with a relationship focus that is there and I also believe having someone that is completely fresh eyes and fresh ears, so they're asking the questions that may be dumb to you, John, or to the building consent team, but actually to the consumer or the customer, they may not be. So I really do stress that it should be someone that is quite fresh to it all. And I think that perhaps that person or however that is done, they also need to be sitting in some regards or have some connection to that panel that has been organised and created as well.
And I think one thing I'd reflect, and this is, I'll put aside the consent issues for one moment, the work that we are doing with the building industry, certainly the Mayor's conversation in terms of bringing our industry together. I think one of the things that we're all sort of conscious of is the point that you raised, Councillor Harvey, about the pressure in the construction sector and the way that that's going to play out, or is playing out, particularly for a lot of our small, medium enterprises, where they're trying to retain staff. They've got, massive price inflation going on, jobs are taking longer, cash flow becomes an issue, and so part of the issues that have been raised by Mayor Sandra along with the other region's leaders with Minister Nash as the Minister for Small Business is going, are we doing enough around wrapping business support also to support these businesses with these things that are just inevitably playing out with supply chain issues, materials, jobs taking longer, trying to hold sort of staff, because history would tell us in the building industry, often the cash flow issues that end up becoming the really big problems, particularly for the small businesses. So just another take on your issue, which I think is a good one around resilience and mental health in the industry.
Councillor Watkins.
Thank you, Chair. Just one quick question and one comment, if I may. John, RFIs, when they're sent out, is there a tag on that RFI that the information must come back to us within a certain timeline? Or if not, knowing architects and everyone is busy, does it just sort of get on the pile and they get to it when they feel they've got time to get to it?
Well, it's definitely down to the person who to respond to it. But architects, like the whole industry, they'll get to as quick as they can, and often sending the RFI to the client will often ring them and say, "Hey, get onto this." But there are some who have got huge amounts of work, and they let it go a little bit, but they're in the same position. They've got huge amounts of work. And it's right across the industry. It's not just
council, it's the design industry as well. Okay. And if I just might make a comment, look, we all know the pressure the team are under on the second floor, and often we hear comments out in the public arena that, you know, things are time delays and other things. But I've just scanned through some letters that we've received that come into the council, and we don't often hear about them. Just giving absolute praise to those people up on the second floor for the helpfulness, for going through the process, for making it easy. There's several here, and we haven't got time to read them out, but I just wanted to say, John, it's great to read this, that people actually take the time to write in and say thank you for your team and everything they're doing to make the process of consenting so enjoyable, and they're extremely happy. So I hope you just get the chance to pass that on to your staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sears.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just picking up on two things and a suggestion. The communication plan is the one thing going out to our community to talk about actually why things are taking so long, this is a national problem, etc. That's one thing, but actually picking up on the Chief's comment around risk, which I think is really significant. The only worst thing in something taking a long time is that it's also done badly. So I'm wondering if there could be some sort of communication or an action point to go out around some communications around what the problems are, what risk means, how important it is for the jobs to be done properly, and explaining to the community why we're experiencing what we're experiencing is something we can use as councillors also to form the community.
Thank you. That's an excellent suggestion. Councillor Ollie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just briefly paint my context and lead into my question. As a renter, I speak on behalf of the vulnerable, commonly Pacifica families who might not be well informed of what their rights are as tenants. The older houses in Flaxmere have big backyards, so landlords commonly build a second dwelling. Without consents. So the issue is they've already started charging the increase in price. My question is there any monitoring of buildings that don't have consent?
What tends to happen is that there are people, one of the neighbours, they might have dispute or something, and then someone rings up complaints, and then Tony Mullenoo, who's our compliance officer, he'll go around and talk to them, and sometimes, they're under the 30 square metre ones, they're okay, but often it'll mean trying to get independent certification for the foundations, whether or not they've got appropriate connections. So it is very difficult because even though they've been put in there illegally, and there's a process that needs to be gone through, they are housing people, but it does often really come about from complaints from neighbours, one to the next. And occasionally, it'll happen where our inspector may be on the site, and they'll realise something's been built next door, and they might check and see if there's an inspection for that place as well. So we do where it's happening. The other one is a significant number of kind of container conversions and caravans as well. That's, I think, a reflection of the situation of the housing across the board.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, we do have... Sorry?
Happy to move.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Happy to move.
Thank you. And a seconder, thank you, Councillor Watkins.
Through you, Chair, though, I would like an action point.
Yes.
That a comms person is aligned to the building advisory board or group to look at ways that we can communicate with our customers.
Thank you.
I think it'd be good if maybe just put it that they need to attend the meetings too.
Attend the meetings.
Yes,
Yes, thank you, John.
Absolutely. That's absolutely fine.
Can we move that from advise to actually engage? To actually engage the customer? Not just advise the committee on how they should, but someone actually needs to engage with the customer. If we're not going to engage, then we haven't achieved anything. Kia ora.
Thank you. So we have a mover and a seconder. I'm going to put those two recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mr Shaughnessy. And now we move on to item 10, and I'll ask Lex to come forward.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, councillors. Well, as you can see, I've kept the report pretty brief, and I actually don't have anything consequential to add, to be fair. So, yeah, it's submitted for your information and questions if you've got them. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Barber. No questions? There being no discussion, I will put that recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Thank you. Those opposed? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mr Verhoeven. Yeah. We now have a recommendation to exclude the public from items 14, 15 and 16. Could I have a mover and seconder? Thank you, Councillor Watkins. Thank you, Councillor Redstone.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, can we hear why, and we usually do hear from the officers as to why we go into PX before we move into PX?
Yes, I'm just waiting for our chief to... thank you, Bruce.
So the reason for going to public excluded with the food directive fees really is protecting the privacy of those individuals as you discuss that item. And the second item is appointment of the Horse of the Year director, and again it's to protect the privacy of that individual so you can have a free and frank conversation about that recommendation. And the update on building consent processing, that was additional information to the agenda item you've just received in public with some additional information, public excluded.
Thank you. I'll put that recommendation to exclude the public. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Thank you.